And welcome back to another video, Purple Political Talk here. Today is Sunday, July 21st, 2024, and we have breaking news in the presidential race. President Joe Biden has dropped out of the presidential race after calls from many Democrats, for him to step down from the Democratic ticket, and he has endorsed Kamala Harris to be his replacement and serve as the top of the ticket, as the next Democratic candidate for the presidency. To be frank, this is something that completely changes the election, not necessarily its expected outcome, but definitely the dynamics of the race. This race is going to be very different with Kamala Harris. Now, considering that the Republicans can't really talk about that age thing because, Donald Trump is really old. Now, these are my first thoughts, especially when it comes to the electoral map and all the things that when we look at a Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris scenario. Now, keep in mind, I'm only basing this off of some recent polls that we've had one-to-one Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. In the coming days, as it becomes more clear this stuff in the polls that we're going to be seeing reflected, because remember, polls are done days out in advance. So it won't be for about another week that we will start seeing Trump versus Harris polls, but it really changes the election. I think, for example, your main states that are, safe Democratic, I think they're going to end up going safe Democratic. Now, here's the thing that while I fill in these safe states, it's very important to note. I think it's really important to understand that while Kamala Harris is definitely bringing some change to the ticket, definitely bringing in, that youth to the ticket, and really being able to be a contrast from Donald Trump in the sense that she's a lot younger. Now, questions really would be, is Donald Trump too old to be president? Which, if we looked at when you compared Trump to Biden, people would say, well, Trump is better fit, at least when you're talking about age and capability of fulfilling the duties of the presidency. But very interestingly enough, I think with Kamala Harris now on the ticket, those things might arise. But at the end of the day, we have to remember one thing. Biden wasn't losing this race, not only because of his age, but because of his policies. And Kamala Harris is a continuation of Biden's policies. And that is definitely going to have some degree of impact on the race, her being Joe Biden's vice president. Now, what's really going to be interesting here is seeing in the next couple of days, are the Democrats able to come together as one party and push their candidate forward as quickly as possible? We have to remember, although the Biden-Harris team might not change that much, just with Harris on top of the ticket, someone new being vetted to be the VP candidate, it's going to be interesting to really take a look at this race through that new perspective where, it's also very close out. We've very rarely had these situations in which a major party candidate drops out this close to the election. So I think it's very interesting. Some of these states, I think, stay pretty much the same, and I'll talk about those, but I think some things in some states might shift a little bit. So on your screen right now are your what I would call likely to toss up states. These are states that are going to be somewhat competitive. Now, some of these states are probably going to be really solidly in the Republican column. States like Iowa, Ohio, Florida have been trending for the Republican Party. I expected that to stay the same, whether it was Joe Biden, whether it was Kamala Harris. I do think it's going to stay very consistent for the Republicans in the state. They've built a lot of grassroots supports in Iowa, Ohio, and Florida that has just become really almost part of the state's political culture at this point. And I think these states are solid Republican states with Harris at the top of the ticket. I don't really think it changes much. In some states like Florida, I think it, makes it tougher. Now, when we talk about the Midwest, and I'm going to talk about this as we go into the states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, the big interesting question is going to be those, working class voters that are probably going to be a huge factor in this race, the suburban voters in these states. Remember, we're looking at a race that last time came down to around 40 to 50,000 votes in each of these states. Do those voters back Donald Trump or do they back Kamala Harris? And that is something that we're going to have to see. We're going to have to see where the momentum in this race goes. Now, if I was Kamala Harris and I was starting to think about a VP, I would think about someone who would do great things in this region. And we'll talk about who that could be in a second. Now, for the Democrats, I think states like New Mexico, Colorado, Virginia, New Hampshire, these are some of these states that, I could have really potentially had seen the Democrats losing ground here. And somewhere like Virginia, it was completely possible with some of the polls that we had seen recently to see Kamala Harris, or rather Joe Biden, lose, or at least come down to maybe a point or two in Virginia. Now, I think with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, it helps the Democrats massively in these states that were more so consistently in their column before, but had more issues with Biden himself. I think that these states, right, are going to be, it's going to be more beneficial for the Democrats in these type of states compared to other states. And again, I think I have to stress the fact, a lot of the issues in the race stay the same. What really, again, changes is who is at the top of the ticket. Now, let's talk about some lean states for the Republicans. I think with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, frankly, the Sun Belt is probably going to be harder to reach. And the reason is Kamala Harris, a lot of the issues that are very important in this region, which immigration and economy, again, we have to remember it always goes back to these main issues, the immigration, economy. And Kamala Harris was in charge of immigration. In states like Arizona, if the Republicans start running ads and you start having these questions of like, what has Kamala Harris done for the border? Her being the crowned border star and, not consistently going. We've already seen attacks from the Trump campaign in this realm. Now, with her at the top of the ticket, you can expect those attacks to really ramp up. Now, what I will say is I think states like North Carolina and Georgia could potentially get closer. I think in some of the more recent polls that we've seen with Biden and Trump, we've seen a +6, +7 lead kind of consistently. I think it's going to go down to maybe 4 or 5 points. Now, I think it just really comes down to the fact that Kamala Harris is going to be able to, at least some degree, be able to get voters to come out and vote in the African American community, which, I think is the difference of her being VP versus the top of the ticket. However, at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be enough for Kamala Harris to overcome Trump in these states. Now, when we talk also about these congressional districts, most recent polling has the Republicans ahead. I think, we're probably looking at the Republicans maintaining some of the margins in the electoral votes in those districts. Now, for the Democrats, I do think the state of Minnesota stands as right now a lean state. I think Kamala Harris could probably win there. We've seen polling that shows it really close. I think some of the voters in Minnesota are probably the type of voters that were probably more scared of voting for someone like Joe Biden because of his age. And I think that the voter that maybe was not going to vote and now may like hold their breath and vote for Kamala Harris. Like, you're talking about these Democratic voters that, probably were not going to vote because of the issues that, Joe Biden had with his age. So I think it's going to be very interesting. And that's where I think the general trend is going to go. In a lot of these states like Minnesota, Virginia, Colorado, New Mexico that have been consistently Democratic over the last 10, 15, 20 years, or becoming more increasingly Democratic, having Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket is going to help out quite a bit. Now, as always, it comes down to the Midwest. And I think right now, states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are going to be in the lean Trump column. I think Trump could build a solid margin in these states. Now, I think the one thing that might change this is, of course, who Kamala Harris chooses to be her vice presidential nominee. I think you have a great pick here in Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. He would be, I think, one of the strongest picks that the Democrats could make to try to maximize their chances in the Midwest. And really, you're looking at the Midwest. That's going to become a little bit more complicated if the Democrats don't make the right VP pick, because Kamala Harris doesn't really have that strong Midwestern working class voter appeal in places like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But we of course know that Donald Trump has that strong appeal, and we know to a certain degree Biden had that sort of appeal. Kamala Harris, not so much. And with JD Vance on the ticket for the Republicans, I think it makes it a little bit more complicated. Now, I think the race is really going to come down to, of course, is these states, and the Democratic strategy is going to go down to maximize the ways to win these states. So I do honestly see them picking a VP nominee that, really helps them out in this area. But these are my initial predictions for a Trump versus Harris mashup. I think we're looking at a 313 to 225 electoral map. As of now, things can change. We have to see how the Veep stakes proceed. We have to see how Kamala Harris being at the top of the ticket, this being the Kamala Harris presidential campaign, how things change. And frankly, I think this could go only one of two ways. Things could improve for the Democrats. I still think that their pathways to victory are still very narrow, quite frankly, but I do think that it potentially could be better. Or if the presidential campaign is just frankly a disaster, then the electoral map we're seeing now could get a lot worse for Democrats if they lose support in Minnesota, Virginia, and New Hampshire. It's really going to be important for Kamala Harris, the ways that she really manages herself at the top of the ticket. I know a lot of people that have, she shares Joe Biden's disapproval rating. In some cases, in some polls, has a lower approval rating than Joe Biden himself. So I think it's very interesting. But we'll see in the next couple of days. I want to know what you think down in the comments below. Do you think the Democrats are making the right choice in replacing Joe Biden? And what do you think it's going to end up looking like, the electoral map? And who should Kamala Harris pick as a VP nominee to maximize her chances of winning? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.